Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Alabama. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're hearing this narration. The year was 1840. The Beaumont Plantation stood as a monument to Southern aristocracy, its imposing white columns rising against the Alabama sky. It was here that Eleanor Beaumont, wife of prominent Judge William Beaumont, would defy the rigid social order of her time. The Beaumont estate, spanning over 1,500 acres of the most fertile soil in Sumter County, represented not merely wealth, but influence that extended from the cotton fields to the highest courtrooms of the state. Judge Beaumont himself sat on the Alabama Supreme Court, his name spoken with a mixture of reverence and fear throughout the region, his reputation for harsh sentencing of both criminals and runaway slaves earning him favor among the planter elite. County records from that year, preserved in the state archives, indicate that the judge owned some 73 enslaved persons, a number that placed him among the wealthiest 5% of slaveholders in the state. The first indication that something was amiss came on the morning of September 17, 1840, when Eleanor's lady's maid entered her bedchamber to find it empty, the bed undisturbed. According to a statement later given to authorities, the maid immediately alerted the household overseer, who discovered that Solomon, the judge's educated manservant, was also missing from his quarters. Judge Beaumont, returning from circuit court duties in Montgomery that afternoon, immediately organized search parties that combed the surrounding swamplands and forests. A notice printed in the Alabama Intelligencer on September 20th offered a reward of $500 for information leading to their recovery. What began as a search for a possibly abducted woman quickly transformed into a scandal that would consume the county's attention for months. With whispered speculation at church gatherings and outright accusations at taverns, the discovery of Eleanor's blood-stained dress at the edge of the cypress swamp a week later seemed to confirm the most salacious rumors that Solomon had murdered the judge's wife during an escape attempt. Yet, as neighbors would later recount to the Montgomery Advertiser, Eleanor had been seen on multiple occasions in deep conversation with Solomon in the plantation's library, their heads bent over books in what one servant described as an unseemly familiarity between mistress and slave. 3 years before her disappearance, Eleanor Whitmore had arrived at the Beaumont Plantation as a new bride, her trunks filled with fine Charleston dresses, and her mind shaped by an education unusual for a woman of her time. A collection of letters discovered in 1921 during the renovation of her sister's Charleston home reveals Eleanor's initial impressions of her new life. The journey from civilization to this remote corner of Alabama felt like traveling backward through time, she wrote to her sister Margaret in October of 1837. Judge Beaumont's home, while impressively grand in its dimensions and furnished with every luxury money might purchase, lacks the refinement and cultural vitality of our Charleston circles. Eleanor had been raised in one of Charleston's oldest families, educated by private tutors in literature, French, and music, accomplishments that found little appreciation in rural Alabama society. The daughter of a prominent shipping merchant who had fallen on hard times, Eleanor had accepted the judge's proposal at her father's urging, a marriage that settled her father's debts rather than answered any romantic inclination. Her initial months at Beaumont were marked by isolation, with Judge William frequently absent on judicial circuits while Eleanor was left to manage a household of strangers. It was during this period that she first mentioned Solomon in her correspondence. Among the household staff is one remarkable individual, a man called Solomon who manages the judge's library and correspondence. Unlike the others, he reads and writes with considerable skill, having been taught by his previous owner's son before being sold to settle gambling debts. Solomon's position was indeed unusual. Plantation account books show he was assigned specific duties as the judge's, quote, personal secretary and attendant. An inventory list from 1,838 notes his value at $1,500, nearly double that of other enslaved men of similar age, with the notation, reads, writes, keeps accounts. Eleanor's letters grow increasingly preoccupied with observations of Solomon as the months progressed, noting his dignified bearing despite his circumstances. He speaks with the erudition of a university man yet must pretend ignorance when other planters visit, she wrote in February 1838. Yesterday I observed him reading Milton when he thought himself unobserved, and I confess I felt a strange kinship with him, both of us performing roles assigned by this society rather than of our choosing. Court documents uncovered during a 1967 historical survey of Alabama judicial records revealed Judge William Beaumont as a man of considerable legal acumen and ruthless ambition. Born to minor gentry in Virginia, he had studied law at William and Mary College before establishing himself in Alabama during the territorial period, shrewdly accumulating land grants and political connections that would serve his ascent to the state's highest court by 1835. The leather-bound journal of his neighbor, Colonel James Whitfield, discovered in an attic trunk in 1952, describes Beaumont as a man of impeccable public countenance, rigorous in matters of law and property, though given to dark moods when crossed. These moods, it seems, manifested most severely in his treatment of those he owned. Plantation punishment records, preserved in the state archives, document his systematic approach to discipline: 20 lashes for work deemed inadequate, 30 for insubordination, and 50 for attempted escape, all administered with clinical precision that matched his judicial reputation. A particularly disturbing entry from June 1839 notes, Solomon given 15 lashes for being found with newspaper. Punishment limited due to value of his services, but warning delivered regarding consequences of further intellectual pretensions. Despite this private brutality, Beaumont maintained an image of relative moderation in public, with church records listing substantial donations to missionary efforts to improve the moral character of the Negro population. His absence from the plantation was frequent and extensive. Circuit court schedules show he traveled at least 20 weeks of the year, presiding over cases throughout Alabama's Black Belt region. During these absences, overseer logs indicate Eleanor was nominally in charge of household affairs, though major decisions regarding plantation management were deferred until the judge's return. Letters from business associates, found in his personal papers, reveal his meticulous attention to financial matters, with one cotton broker writing, "Your attention to market fluctuations rivals your attention to legal precedent, my friend." Few men could manage both bench and business with such precision. Perhaps most telling was a statement given in 1843 by Reverend Thomas Miller to the Alabama Baptist Convention, investigating rumors of impropriety at the Beaumont plantation. Judge Beaumont presented himself as the very model of Christian propriety and paternal care toward his dependents. Yet there were whispers among those who worked his land that suggested a man whose public face and private conduct existed in separate worlds entirely. The first meaningful encounter between Eleanor and Solomon occurred in the plantation library during the winter of 1838, documented in a leather-bound diary recovered from a hidden compartment in Eleanor's writing desk during the estate's conversion to a museum in 1912. "Today I discovered Mr. Solomon," she wrote, using an honorific that would have been scandalous if spoken aloud, arranging the new volumes from Philadelphia. When I inquired about his knowledge of literature, his eyes revealed panic before he carefully lowered them and affected ignorance. I assured him that within the library walls we might speak freely of books. Subsequent entries detail their gradual formation of what Eleanor termed an island of civilization amid this intellectual desert. Their conversations, conducted during Judge Beaumont's frequent absences, centered initially on the classics, Homer, Virgil, Milton, but gradually expanded to more dangerous territories. Enlightenment philosophy, abolitionist pamphlets hidden among the judge's legal volumes, discussions of natural rights that would have been considered seditious in Alabama society. Solomon's personal history emerged through these conversations, later corroborated by interviews conducted in 1870 with Bethany Johnson, a former Beaumont house servant, by Frederick Douglass's newspaper. Solomon had been born on a Virginia plantation, where the owner's daughter, educated at a Philadelphia seminary, had secretly taught him to read alongside her own studies. He spoke of Miss Caroline with reverence. Eleanor recorded in April 1838 how she recognized his quick mind and would leave books where he might find them, testing him later on their contents. This education became both blessing and curse when, at 19, Solomon's mathematical abilities caught the attention of a neighboring planter who purchased him as an account keeper. 3 years later, his wife and infant son were sold to separate buyers after their owner faced bankruptcy. He speaks of this loss with such controlled anguish that I find myself unable to meet his eyes, Eleanor confided to her diary. Though he maintains perfect composure, his words reveal wounds that can never heal under our country's monstrous system. By summer 1838, Eleanor had begun requesting Solomon's assistance with correspondence whenever the judge was away, creating legitimate reasons for their increasingly lengthy conversations. Her diary entry from August 15th reveals a pivotal realization. I find in S. the intellectual companionship I have craved since leaving Charleston. How strange that the one mind that matches my own should be found in one whom the law declares has no right to such a mind at all. The discovery of Eleanor's blood-stained dress occurred on September 24th, 1840, exactly 1 week after the disappearance. According to the sworn statement of Jeremiah Blackwood, overseer of the neighboring Taliaferro plantation, the garment was found partially submerged in the dark waters at the edge of Cypress Creek Swamp, approximately 3 miles from the Beaumont property line. County sheriff records describe the evidence in clinical detail. One lady's dress of blue silk, torn at the shoulder and hem, bearing substantial bloodstains across the bodice and right sleeve. When presented with the grim discovery, Judge Beaumont's response was immediate and thunderous. "This Negro has murdered my wife," he declared before the hastily assembled search party, a statement recorded in the diary of Reverend Silas Montgomery, who had been summoned to offer prayers for Eleanor's soul. The Montgomery Advertiser's front-page story on September 26th quoted the judge promising justice swift and terrible for the savage criminal who had abducted and apparently killed his wife. What followed was a campaign of brutal interrogation across the plantation, documented in the overseer's log with dispassionate precision. September 25 to 27, questioned all house servants regarding Solomon's movements and possible hiding locations. Applied necessary force to ensure truthful responses. Medical records from Dr. James Wilson, preserved in county archives, substantiate the euphemism, noting treatment of 5 enslaved individuals for injuries sustained during questioning, including 2 cases of broken ribs and 1 fractured jaw. Judge Beaumont personally led expanded search parties into the swamplands, offering a reward that had now increased to $1,000 for Solomon, dead or alive. The blood on the dress was presumed to be Eleanor's, fueling both the judge's rage and public sympathy for his loss. A notation in Dr. Wilson's records, overlooked until examined by historians in 1978, indicates he was never asked to verify whether the blood type matched Eleanor's known medical conditions. The Beaumont plantation's head groom finally provided the testimony the judge sought. He claimed to have seen Solomon heading toward the swamp with a bundle the night of the disappearance, though his granddaughter would later claim this confession came only after the man had endured whipping to unconsciousness. 15 years after the disappearance, in 1855, a reporter from the New York Tribune named Marcus Finley traveled to Alabama researching a series on Southern peculiarities and succeeded in locating several former Beaumont house servants who had been sold after the scandal. Their accounts, published in the Tribune's November issue but quickly suppressed in southern states, offered a dramatically different narrative of the relationship between mistress and slave. Sarah, who had served as lady's maid to Mrs. Beaumont, reported witnessing numerous clandestine meetings between her mistress and Solomon, most often in the library when the judge was absent on circuit. Finley wrote, "These encounters began as literary discussions but evolved into something deeper, with Sarah observing them sitting inappropriately close, their hands occasionally touching as they exchanged books. Most revealing were the detailed descriptions of an elaborate system of signals the pair had developed to communicate under the watchful eyes of the household. According to James, a former footman, Eleanor would request certain books be brought to her room. Paradise Lost, requested on a Tuesday, meant Solomon should meet her in the South Garden after midnight, while a request for Wordsworth's poetry indicated the library meeting place. The gardener's assistant described observing Eleanor leaving small markers to indicate safety or danger. A blue ribbon tied to the garden gate meant the overseer was away, while a red one signaled caution. Several servants reported that Eleanor and Solomon had developed a method of exchanging notes hidden within the bindings of books shuttled between the library and her personal quarters, with messages written in the margins of specific pages. Perhaps most damning was the testimony of the elderly cook, who claimed to have observed the mistress teaching that Solomon how to dance one night in the library when the judge was away in Montgomery, standing closer than any white woman ought to stand to a colored man, laughing in a way I never heard her laugh with the master. These accounts, collected from individuals now scattered across different plantations and speaking without fear of reprisal from the long-deceased judge, painted a portrait of a relationship that had developed gradually over months, moving from intellectual companionship to something far more dangerous in the context of 1842nd Alabama. Most significantly, multiple servants testified to overhearing fragments of conversations about northern cities and paths to freedom in the weeks before the disappearance. In the humid summer of 1945, as America celebrated victory in Europe, the Beaumont Plantation, long since transformed into a dilapidated tenant farm, was undergoing renovation for designation as a state historical site. It was during the careful dismantling of the former slave quarters that construction worker Thomas Jefferson Williams pried up a warped floorboard and discovered a small tin box, sealed with wax and wrapped in oilcloth. The discovery might have been discarded as trash had Professor Margaret Wilson of Spelman College not been present that day, conducting a survey of the buildings for the Alabama Historical Commission. Wilson, one of the few female African-American historians of her era, immediately recognized the potential significance of the find, later writing in her academic memoir, "The moment that small, time-darkened volume emerged from its hiding place, I felt history's breath on my neck." The diary, confirmed through handwriting analysis to be Eleanor Beaumont's, contained entries spanning January through September 1840, its final pages torn out, perhaps in haste. The Alabama Department of Archives rushed to preserve the fragile document, creating a photostatic copy that revealed Eleanor's innermost thoughts in faded, sometimes water-damaged script. Early entries maintained the formal tone expected of a plantation mistress, but by March 1840, a profound shift was evident. I find myself watching the library door, anticipating his arrival with an eagerness that both thrills and terrifies me. Read one passage highlighted in Wilson's landmark 1947 paper on the discovery. Another entry from April confessed, "Today our fingers touched as he handed me Emerson's latest essay. The sensation traveled through me like lightning, and I saw in his eyes that he felt it too, this impossible thing between us." Wilson's paper, initially rejected by 3 academic journals before finding publication in the smaller Journal of Southern Cultural Studies, argued that the diary represented a revolutionary document revealing the deeply human realities beneath the South's racial mythology. Most controversial was Eleanor's entry from June 17th. "I have spent my life in a beautiful cage, admired but never free. Solomon has spent his in an ugly one, despised rather than treasured, but both of us are equally imprisoned. In our conversations I have found the only true freedom my soul has ever known." Professor Wilson's analysis of the diary revealed increasingly detailed escape plans developing between Eleanor and Solomon through the summer of 1840, with entries growing more coded as the scheme solidified. "S has made contact with the friends in Mobile," Eleanor wrote on July 4th, ironically America's Independence Day. "The captain of the northern vessel will accept the arrangement provided we reach the harbor by the appointed hour. The diary detailed an underground network of sympathizers, including a Quaker merchant in Mobile, referred to only as Mr. P, who provided information about ships bound for Philadelphia and the names of contacts in the North who might shelter them. Most astonishing to historians was the revelation that Eleanor had been secretly liquidating her personal inheritance, jewelry and bonds left by her grandmother, converting them to portable currency through a series of transactions designed to avoid suspicion. Each gold piece sewn into my traveling cloak represents a step toward freedom, she noted on August 12th. $200 should sustain us until employment can be secured. Yet alongside these pragmatic preparations ran a current of profound ambivalence. I wake each morning in my fine bed, attended by servants wanting for nothing material, she confessed in late July, and wonder if I possess the courage to trade this comfortable prison for the dangerous uncertainty of freedom. This internal struggle intensified as their departure date approached. Today at dinner, Mrs. Halliday spoke of a runaway captured in Tennessee, describing his punishment in vivid detail while buttering her bread as casually as if discussing the weather, reads an August entry. The ladies nodded in approval while I excused myself, barely reaching my room before vomiting. This is the society I have accepted. Its comforts built upon unspeakable cruelties I can no longer pretend not to see. The final intact pages of the diary, dated September 10th, just 1 week before the disappearance, contained a passage that Professor Wilson's paper identified as Eleanor's moment of irrevocable decision. I have measured my life's worth and found it wanting. The silk dresses, the social position, the respectable emptiness stretching before me like a well-appointed tomb, against the promise of living honestly, loving freely, standing finally on the right side of God's justice. There is no choice at all, only the appearance of one. Judge Beaumont's growing unease regarding his wife's behavior emerges clearly in a series of letters to his brother Charles, discovered among family papers donated to the Alabama Historical Society in 1932. I find Eleanor increasingly withdrawn from proper society, he wrote in early August 1840, spending inordinate hours in the library with that educated Negro, Solomon, under the pretense of cataloging my legal volumes. His suspicions, initially focused on Eleanor's intellectual impropriety rather than romantic attachment, intensified through the month. There is something unnatural in a woman's excessive interest in literature and philosophy, he complained on August 17th. More disturbing still is her defense of the slave's opinions on such matters, as if his thoughts carry weight equal to those of educated white men. Plantation records indicate Judge Beaumont's response was swift and calculated. Solomon was reassigned to field labor for 2 weeks, a punishment reversed only when the judge's correspondence began to suffer from lack of his secretary's organizational skills. Upon Solomon's return to household duties, Beaumont implemented what he termed necessary precautions, documented in instructions to his overseer. Solomon was forbidden to be alone with Eleanor. The library door was to remain open during any interaction, and household servants were instructed to report any unusual conversations. According to testimony from Lucinda, a housemaid interviewed for the New York Tribune's 1855 investigation, these measures culminated in a dramatic confrontation in early September when the judge returned unexpectedly from court duties and discovered Eleanor reading poetry aloud while Solomon arranged books nearby. The master's face turned purple as a summer plum, Lucinda recounted. He accused the mistress of forgetting her position and disgracing his name by treating a Negro as an intellectual equal, rather than offering the expected apologies. Eleanor reportedly responded with unprecedented defiance. "You have purchased his body, husband, but his mind remains his own, as does mine." The judge's diary, normally meticulous in recording daily events, contains a conspicuous 2-day gap following this incident, while the Plantation punishment ledger shows no entry for Solomon despite the provocation, a curious omission suggesting the judge may have recognized he was walking a dangerous line between discipline and potentially damaging, valuable property. The night of September 16th, 1840, When Eleanor Beaumont and Solomon vanished from Alabama society has been meticulously reconstructed by historians from fragmentary evidence scattered across decades of discovery. According to the Plantation Weather Journal, recovered during the Historical Society's 1967 survey, a violent autumn storm descended upon Sumter County at approximately 7 o'clock in the evening, bringing torrential rain and frequent lightning. This meteorological detail proved crucial to their plan, as confirmed by Eleanor's final diary entry, found water damaged but still legible. The heavens themselves conspire to aid our flight, offering darkness and the cover of rainfall to mask our departure. Judge Beaumont's absence was equally fortuitous, with court records confirming his presence in Montgomery for an extended session hearing appeals cases, a 3-day journey from the plantation. Testimony from Samuel, a stable boy interviewed in 1855, revealed that Solomon had spent previous weeks identifying which horses would travel most quietly and conditioning them for a long journey. He took the judge's own black gelding and the mistress's mare. Samuel recalled, both chosen because they wouldn't whinny and give alarm. The timing of their departure, shortly after midnight according to the night watchman's later confession, allowed them to utilize abandoned hunting paths through the cypress swamp, routes known to Solomon through his previous punishment of gathering Spanish moss in its depths. Perhaps most ingenious was their deliberate misdirection. Eleanor's blood-stained dress, later discovered in the swamp, had been planted as a false trail. Chemical analysis performed in 1978 on fabric fragments revealed the blood came from a chicken, not a human source. Hannah, the Beaumont cook, provided the most poignant detail in her Tribune interview. Miss Eleanor left wearing her plainest traveling dress, but I caught sight of something blue beneath. She'd sewn her wedding rings and a small gold locket into the hem. Most remarkable was the testimony of Reverend Isaiah Beaumont, the judge's distant cousin and secret abolitionist, whose private papers were discovered in 2010. The woman, once mistress of 70 souls, now carries her worldly possessions in a single carpetbag, while her companion, still legally property himself, stands taller in freedom than any plantation master I have known. Judge Beaumont's fury upon discovering the dual disappearance manifested in a manhunt unprecedented in its scope and resources, documented in correspondence with sheriffs across 3 states found in Alabama judicial archives. I will spare no expense to recover my property and bring my wife's abductor to justice, he wrote to the governor of Mississippi on September 20th, invoking both personal friendship and political favors to extend his reach beyond Alabama's borders. Court records reveal the judge secured special writs authorizing search parties to cross state lines, unusual legal measures that reflected both his influence and determination. Within a week, Beaumont had established a network of informants in taverns, stagecoach stops, and river ports across the Deep South, offering rewards that increased with each passing day. $1,000 became $3,000, then $5,000. Sums that would have represented several years' income for most Southern farmers. The deliberate misdirection orchestrated by the fugitives became apparent only decades later, when historian Margaret Wilson pieced together a pattern of false sightings that drew pursuit consistently westward. A Missouri newspaper from October 1840, discovered in 1970, reported credible witnesses placing a white woman and black man matching Eleanor and Solomon's descriptions on a steamboat heading toward St. Louis. Meanwhile, stagecoach receipts found among the judge's papers showed he personally traveled to Arkansas in November, following reports they had been seen in Little Rock. Most ingenious was the discovery in 1985 of forged letters, apparently written by Eleanor but later proven to be in Solomon's handwriting, sent to her sister in Charleston from Texas, claiming they were continuing westward toward Mexican territory where Solomon might live as a free man. These deliberate breadcrumbs successfully diverted attention from their actual route through Tennessee and Kentucky toward Philadelphia, a journey documented in the account books of Underground Railroad conductor Jacob Gibbs, uncovered in an Ohio Historical Society archive in 1963. An entry dated October 12 noted, "Received special travelers from deepest Alabama, woman of quality and learned companion, requiring exceptional precautions given the extraordinary resources deployed in their pursuit. Forwarded north with additional security measures. The judge's search continued relentlessly through the winter of 1840–41, expanding to include hired Pinkerton detectives, until financial records indicate his personal funds began to deplete significantly, forcing a scaling back of the manhunt by spring. The first concrete evidence of Eleanor and Solomon's fate emerged in 1894 when the Philadelphia Historical Society acquired the papers of prominent abolitionist Lucretia Mott, which included cryptic references to "our Southern friends" in correspondence from 1841. The gentleman from Alabama and his companion have been settled in rooms above the Johnson print shop. Mott wrote to fellow Quaker Hannah Darby, "She adapts to reduced circumstances with remarkable grace, though I notice her hands, once ornamental, are now reddened with work." Census records from 1850 reveal a Thomas and Sarah Johnson, listed as mulatto, operating a small bookbinding business in Philadelphia's 7th Ward, where the free black community offered both protection and anonymity. Their ages and reported birthplaces, Maryland for him and Virginia for her, were falsified. But handwriting analysis of business receipts conducted in 2005 showed striking similarities to both Eleanor's diary script and Solomon's penmanship from Judge Beaumont's correspondence. Their life in Philadelphia balanced precariously between establishment and invisibility, as detailed in the account books of William Still, a conductor on the Underground Railroad whose records were published in 1872. The couple from the Deep South maintained constant vigilance, he noted in 1848. They have twice relocated upon rumors of Southern men making inquiries in their neighborhood. This tenuous security shattered with the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, which empowered slave catchers to seize escaped slaves even in free states, with increased penalties for those assisting fugitives. A letter from Harriet Tubman to abolitionist Thomas Garrett, discovered in Yale University's archives in 1967, mentions urgent arrangements to move the Alabama pair to Canada, following 2 near captures by bounty hunters still carrying Judge B's decades-old reward notices. The Philadelphia Anti-Slavery Society's meeting minutes from December 1850 record a unanimous vote to provide emergency funds for transportation of particularly vulnerable parties to safer harbor in British territory, where American laws hold no dominion, followed by notations of specific donations earmarked for the distinguished refugees whose discovery would cause particular sensation given the lady's former position. In 1972, Dr. Robert Wilkinson, researching Philadelphia's abolitionist communities, uncovered a collection of letters in a previously uncatalogued archive donated by the disbanded First African Presbyterian Church. The correspondence, spanning 1851 to 1865, bore the signature Sarah Johnson, but handwriting analysis confirmed what Dr. Wilkinson immediately suspected. They matched perfectly with Eleanor Beaumont's distinctive penmanship from her Plantation diary. These letters, written to a dear friend, identified only as L., presumably Lucretia Mott, offer the most comprehensive glimpse into the fugitive couple's reinvented lives. "Our little shop continues to provide sufficient income," Eleanor wrote in 1852. "With Thomas's skill at binding and my own at decorative lettering attracting a modest but loyal clientele among Philadelphia's colored literati." The correspondence reveals their gradual integration into the free, black community, with references to church socials, literary society meetings, and fundraising efforts for recently arrived fugitives. Yet beneath this appearance of normalcy ran a constant current of vigilance. "We still maintain our practice of separate Sabbath attendance," noted a letter from 1855, "as 2 decades have not erased the possibility that some visitor from Alabama might recognize a face out of context." Most poignant were Eleanor's reflections on her transformed identity. "I sometimes marvel at the woman I have become," she wrote in 1857, "with hands roughened by honest labor rather than idle embroidery, finding more satisfaction in one day of earned bread than in a lifetime of unearned privilege. The letters chronicle their continued anxiety following the Dred Scott decision, with mentions of arrangements with Canadian friends should immediate departure become necessary. Their fears intensified during the Civil War, with Eleanor noting, "The conflict that might eventually secure Thomas's legal freedom has paradoxically increased our danger, as Southern refugees in Philadelphia might include those who once attended the judge's social gatherings." The final letter in the collection, dated April 1865, reveals their reaction to news of the South's surrender. "We wept together upon hearing of Appomattox." Yet Thomas remarked with his characteristic wisdom that while legal chains might be struck off, the fetters of memory and habit would bind this nation for generations to come. Judge William Beaumont's inexorable decline following Eleanor and Solomon's escape was documented with clinical precision in the records of the Alabama Supreme Court, which noted his increasing absences from the bench throughout the 1,840 seconds. The Montgomery Advertiser reported in 1843 that the once formidable jurist appeared disheveled and distracted during a prominent murder trial, with witnesses describing his hands as trembling visibly when lifting court documents. Financial records from the Bank of Alabama reveal the catastrophic impact of his obsessive pursuit, with mortgage notices filed against the Beaumont Plantation in 1845 and again in 1848, each loan apparently financing another fruitless search expedition. By 1850, court documents show he had been quietly asked to resign his judgeship, receiving a modest pension that barely sustained his increasingly reclusive existence in what remained of his once grand estate. The plantation itself had dwindled to less than half its original size, portions sold off to satisfy creditors, with only a skeleton staff of slaves remaining, most having been sold to fund his decade-long manhunt. When found dead in his library in January 1855, a half-empty bottle of laudanum on his desk, local authorities ruled it a death by misadventure, but private correspondence between the county coroner and Beaumont's only surviving relative acknowledged the obvious suicide. It was during the subsequent settlement of his meager estate that his solicitor, James Thornton, discovered a small locked drawer in the judge's desk, its contents uncatalogued in any official inventory. Thornton's personal diary, donated to the Alabama Archives in 1901, records his astonishment at finding a gold locket containing a miniature portrait of the long-missing Mrs. Beaumont, alongside a half-completed letter dated 1851 that suggests the unthinkable, that the judge had somehow located the fugitives in Philadelphia, yet chosen not to reveal their whereabouts. The fragmentary letter, preserved now in the state archives, contains the cryptic lines, "Having seen with my own eyes that you live contentedly with him, having observed undetected your new life from across that Philadelphia street, I find myself unable to proceed with." The remainder was never written, leaving historians to debate whether this represented a final act of love, a recognition of his role in driving Eleanor away, or simply the exhaustion of a man who had spent a decade consumed by vengeance, only to find its fulfillment hollow. The final chapter in Eleanor and Solomon's extraordinary story began in 1980, when University of Pennsylvania archaeologists, documenting neglected African-American burial grounds, discovered matching gravestones in Philadelphia's Lebanon Cemetery bearing the names Thomas Johnson, 1815 to 1882, and Sarah Johnson, 1818 to 1879. The modest markers, weathered by time but professionally carved, bore the inscription, "They chose freedom" at their base, a phrase that resonated with researchers familiar with the Beaumont case. Subsequent archival work revealed the graves had been maintained through payments from a trust established by T&S Johnson, with a local black-owned bank, payments continuing automatically decades after their deaths. In 2010, the most tantalizing development emerged when genealogist Dr. Miranda Coleman identified several Philadelphia families potentially descended from the couple, with DNA testing revealing markers consistent with both West African ancestry and the genetic profile of Eleanor's Charleston family line, established through testing distant cousins in South Carolina. The results, while suggestive, remain inconclusive, a fitting metaphor for a story that continues to resist definitive resolution despite nearly 2 centuries of investigation. The Beaumont Plantation itself, now restored as a state historical site, has become both a monument to antebellum architecture and an unexpected memorial to a love that defied the most rigid social boundaries of American history. Visitors consistently report unexplained phenomena: the sound of a woman's soft voice reading poetry in the empty library, footsteps crossing the upstairs hallway when no one is present, the scent of lilacs, Eleanor's favorite perfume, according to her sister's letters, appearing suddenly in the garden, where they reportedly held clandestine meetings. Most persistent are accounts from the restored slave quarters, where overnight staff describe hearing a deep male voice reciting what sounds like Milton's Paradise Lost near the spot where Eleanor's diary remained hidden for over a century. Whether these reports reflect supernatural echoes or the power of a story that continues to haunt our national imagination, Eleanor and Solomon's choice to reject the brutal certainties of their time for the dangerous uncertainties of freedom represents a profound challenge to simplified narratives of the antebellum South, a testament to the complex humanity that persisted even within a system designed to deny that very humanity to those it enslaved.